So you run a company called WholeGrain Digital, right? So
yeah.
You tell me a bit about, just the sort of bio of that company, when you started it, how long it's been running, how many people you are, what kind of projects you do, this kind of stuff, just the generic pitch for the company.
Yeah, sure. So WholeGrain Digital has been going since 2017, and it was started by myself and my wife, Vinita. And it sort of stemmed from a few things, some of which were lifestyle related in terms of just wanting to run our own business together, but also a desire to sort of experiment with the concept of sustainable business. At university, I had sort of done my thesis on sustainable design, and I was really sort of fascinated with this idea that design and business can be like a core part of the solution to creating a sustainable society. And so in order to sort of prove that, I thought, well, why don't we start our own design business? Because then we're using design and business to try and see if it's possible. And so that led us to start the business. We're a specialist WordPress design and development agency. And we're very much focused on working with positive clients. And, positive is obviously very subjective, but from our point of view, it's about working with businesses that have a mission that's beyond financial profit, and also working with sort of non-profit and public sector organizations that are trying to sort of use technology and design to create a positive society. So that's really sort of an overview of what we do. And then over the years, it's been sort of 12 and a half years now, we've gone through sort of various phases of our experimentation and how far we push ourselves in sustainability particularly. So a big turning point was 3 years ago when we got certified as B Corp. And that really kind of focused my mind and I think the rest of the team on saying to ourselves, like, let's take this less casually, let's like really push ourselves and be much more focused on all of the details.
Okay.
And that actually ended up with us kind of looking into the carbon emissions of websites and trying to work that out from the academic literature, because there's that sort of principle that you can't manage what you can't measure. And there was really no kind of way of quantifying the impact of our own work. Like, we could quantify the impact of our travel and office energy and things like that, but not of the actual products that we were building. So doing that has then led to us sort of having a completely different design and development process that's really focused on efficiency. And now that's kind of in turn led us to be really driven in terms of web performance. And that's sort of one of our key USPs for our clients is sort of, in a way, although the passion is sustainability, the USP for the clients is web performance. Okay.
By web performance, you mean speed?
I mean speed, yeah, absolutely. Speed and the side effect of speed, which is accessibility. So not sort of the traditional concept of accessibility, which is important and we really focus on as a team. But one of the aspects of accessibility that I think is talked about less is actually the really basic level of, like, can you load the site where you are on the device that you're on?
Right.
And web performance is really central to that.
Okay, so I took some notes while you were talking through that. You mentioned at the beginning that you did a thesis on sustainable design, right? What were you studying? Was it like product design or engineering? What's your sort of academic background?
Yeah, it was literally both of those things. So the course was called Engineering Product Design.
Okay.
So it was basically a mixture of industrial design and mechanical engineering. And so all of my research at that point was very much focused around, physical products and manufacturing and the use of those products, disposal, end of life, and all of that stuff. And obviously now product design as a term is now morphed completely when you say you do product design. People think you make apps.
Yeah, it's something we've sort of distanced ourselves from, at least in software circles, I suppose. But it's hypothetically, at least, when you think about designing a physical product, like, well, a phone, right, or a toy or something like that.
Yeah,
it's kind of easy. I'll put that in quotes, to think about how you might do that more sustainably, right? The choice of materials you're going to use, how they degrade, if at their end of life, where they're sourced from, the energy using in producing the product, the packaging, the transportation, and all of that stuff. Very little of that sort of maps in an obvious way to building a website or an app.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
And so what is your process? You mentioned that you have a sustainable design process that you use when doing client work, right? So can you take me through that process?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're spot on in terms of your physical product design is, I wouldn't say it's easy, but it's much more tangible.
It's easier to imagine, not easier to achieve, but easier to imagine, for me at least.
Absolutely. And then I think the problem with web, and part of the reason it's not talked about that much, is just that it's so abstract and you can't really grasp, where is the environmental impact. So ultimately it's about electricity use and where possible, like what type of electricity you're using. Are you using renewable energy, or are you using sort of standard grid energy, which is primarily in most countries not renewable. So looking at that in the design process, we can basically see a few different things. One of them, I'll go with the low-hanging fruit first because it's just simple to pick off, is the one part of the energy supply that you can control is the data center. Mm-hmm. So energy is basically used in the data centers, in the telephone networks, sending the data around the world, and then obviously in the end user's device, whether it's a laptop or a smart TV or a phone or what have you. The telephone networks and the end user devices, you can't control what electricity they're using. You don't even know who they are, where they are, or anything like that. But the data center is your choice. It's basically your hosting company. Where do you put your website? So the easy part of the process to pick off is basically finding suppliers that have a commitment to using 100% renewable energy.
What suppliers are there that are good in that respect?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, there's more than you'd imagine. On the big scale, you've got people like Google who have committed to using 100% renewable energy. On the smaller scale, you've got companies like Positive Internet who are based in London. They've got their own data center and they're sort of like genuinely really committed to being a sustainable company. So another one that's been mentioned a lot of times, only one of our clients uses them, but is Crystal Hosting in the UK, who also have their own data center powered by renewable energy. So there's quite a few options, and the Green Web Foundation have a directory and a tool you can use to sort of check out whether a particular host has a tangible commitment to using green energy, and they're sort of upgrading that tool over time to make it more transparent and more detailed. Yeah. So that's really good. So that's kind of the easy win. It's just find a host that's committed to using renewable energy. Then the design and build process is where is basically the bit where it's more complicated, but it's essentially about efficiency. So minimizing data transfer and minimizing the amount of processing that the servers need to do, because they're the two sort of main things that consume energy. In the design process, the big thing is file sizes. So if you start a design project from the point of view that we want to transfer as little data as possible, and the designer and the project manager and the client and you've got the developers on board right from the beginning of the design process as well, then you can have those conversations about every detail of the design, about like how many different typefaces are we using, and do these images need to be full screen, and do these videos need to autoplay, and do we need JPEG sort of photographs to create the app, like the sort of the visual effect, the emotional connection, or could we achieve this with like vector graphics that are much more small files? So challenging every one of those details in the design process makes a huge difference before you even get to development.
Okay, when you say it makes a huge difference,
yeah,
what are we talking about here? Like, do you mean, huge difference in terms of the sort of download speeds? What sort of differences have you seen maybe in a project that you've done?
Yeah, so I mean, if you take, just as an example, I mean, the easiest example to take would be like our own website, where we've got it down to like 200 kilobytes for the homepage, and the load time is like, it's like 0.3 seconds or something, rather than a typical website, which probably, and I don't know what the official average sort of load time is, but a lot of websites are taking somewhere around kind of 2, 3, 4 seconds to load. So that's a huge difference. And in terms of just sort of generally on average with our client sites, we find that the measured carbon emissions, which we use, the tool that we built sort of from the research that we did, we put online at websitecarbon.com.
Yes, I've come across that recently. Yeah.
Yeah, great. So that's sort of available for anybody to use, and of course we've got our own kind of like sort of variations of that behind the scenes that we can use. But with our client projects, what we find is that they come out at about, on average, about half the carbon emissions of an average website that's tested through that tool. So an average website is producing about 4 grams of CO2 for every page load. And then our client sites are coming out sort of sub 2 grams on average. But where possible, we're trying to push it lower than that. So we have some clients where they just have requirements for a lot more a much more visual experience, and that requires bigger files. But then a lot of people don't actually need that. And that's the point about challenging in the design process. Do you need it?
So, having worked as a designer myself, I know that one of the things that, when you're doing client work, right, especially as an agency, you I don't know if this is the case for you, but I've often run into sort of the issue of needing to convince a client or sell a client on a particular design approach, right? Whether that's how you're actually laying things out, or in this case that you don't need such large images or whatever, things like that. How does that conversation go? Are you managing to convince clients? What's the kind of
that is the absolutely biggest challenge, and the key, I think, is finding out what the client really cares about. I mean, I think most clients do care about climate change, but it's not the top of their priority list. The top of their priority list is like whatever their marketing goals are, or like functional requirements like accessibility, if they're, for example, like public sector organization or something like that. So I think the key is finding out what they really care about, and then finding a way of like selling it to them from that perspective. Web performance is the one that I think, from our experience, is the most sort of common thing, because I think most marketing managers get that that's important. They get that people are impatient and that good user experience requires things to happen fast. That it's also good for SEO. And they also get it when you talk about the fact that, although accessibility might not be top of their priority list, when you actually talk about the fact that your users might be sitting on a train on their commute with really, dodgy train Wi-Fi trying to look at your website, that resonates with them. So I think it's just about finding those angles where maybe our motivation is sustainability. But if we can basically sell the design decisions, so it's in their best interests, then that's what will make them.
And do you, is it like that you don't bring it up and it's sort of something you're slipping in as a side effect, or is it, is it like, you come up with a design or a design approach and you go to the client and like, well, here's the 5 things you're getting with this design. it's faster, it's going to be great for people who have accessibility needs, it's great for people who are on trains, you're going to get more SEO. And then, a little sort of like footnote, and it's really, it's also doing this. Or is it,
mostly it is that. There's sometimes you have clients where sustainability is much higher on their list. Okay. And therefore it's much more front and center in the conversation, because they may have their own goals about being a sustainable organization. And they want their digital presence to reflect that. But for most clients, it is that, like, it's that sort of cherry on the cake where you've got all those other benefits, and then it's like, yes, and it's lower carbon.
Yeah. Which I'm not, it's not really a critique. It's more sort of, how to actually position this to people who might not be sort of like really thinking about this. But you mentioned
the other thing, just the other thing to mention there is that as well, like, a lot of these design decisions are very subjective. And so as long as they are really happy that it looks great, they won't necessarily have an issue with it. If you presented a design to them that was like, didn't look that good, and you were trying to say, oh, but it's really fast and it's like good for the environment, then it would be really, really hard to sell, and they'd probably end up not a very happy client in the end. But if it looks just as good, but it's lower carbon, that's the goal, is that they shouldn't be compromising on the quality.
Okay, yes, and that's a fair point, right? Because I guess we're used to a certain standard of product or design, I suppose, and which maybe is a bigger conversation, or a sort of different conversation as to like what our expectations should be in certain areas. Right. But you mentioned before about I think 3 years ago you said you got yourself certified as a B Corp, right? When you started the process. And in the conversations I've been having, B Corps have come up quite a few times. So I guess, what was your, let's start with, what was your experience with going through the certification process? How did, what did you have to change, or what did you have to measure that you weren't, and then what did you have to change?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, it was an interesting process that originally started more as a curiosity than an actual goal, because you can actually do the B impact assessment for free on their website without any commitment. So that's how it began. And as I went through that process, I found that it was asking questions where I kind of knew what the answers should be, but they weren't necessarily things that I could commit to.
Like what? What sort of things, if you remember something specific?
Yeah, well, a lot of it was to do with documentation. So it was things about, including things like, are you measuring your carbon emissions, and like your sort of staff policies and things like this, where I think until we went through that process, we're still quite an informal company, but we were informal in the like administrative sense as well as the cultural sense. And so when you go through a process like that, where they're asking you to be able to prove everything that you say. So they won't in reality, they won't check every single detail in the assessment, but in theory, like, you need to be able to back it up, and they do spot check certain things, and there's a sort of interview you go to once you finish the assessment. And so going through that process really made me realize how much we were doing things in this sort of really informal way, where we thought we were doing it really well, but we couldn't really document it. We hadn't really documented it. We couldn't really back it up with numbers and evidence. And that actually being able to do that would be a really good thing, because then we'd know, like, are we actually doing as well as we think we're doing? Or are we just sort of, kidding ourselves?
Yeah. Okay. So how long did it take you to actually make those changes?
From first sort of going through the assessment to actually then filing our application for certification took us about 6 months. And that time, I mean, there's obviously a fair amount of work involved in actually just going through the assessment and gathering documents, but then there's also a lot of work in filling the holes where you realize that, well, okay, like, you know, we roughly know what our carbon emissions are, but we haven't done it in the level of detail we need to. So we need to actually invest time in doing that. Those sorts of things. And similarly, there's things which can be not fundamentally difficult, but a bit of a hassle. Like, we were in an office space that used renewable energy, had a renewable energy tariff for the whole office space. That was part of the reason we were there. But then the question is, how do you know that's true?
Yes, that's a big problem that I've been sort of, you know, it's one of the things on the sort of bucket list, I suppose, of things. But you see a lot of claims from so many different companies, right? Whether they're producing food or physical goods or digital goods or whatever, where they're like, oh, this is the eco version. Like, I don't know, like you can buy an eco fridge, and you're like, what the fuck does that mean, right? What is?
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of claims made, and there's no kind of real like policing of whether these claims are true or not.
So what did you find out about your office? Or did you?
So what we found, well, that was interesting, because what we found out was that they did genuinely have a contract with a company that specified 100% renewable energy, and they showed that contract to us.
Okay.
But they wouldn't give us a copy of it. And because they wouldn't give us a copy of it in the B impact assessment, they basically wouldn't count it. So it was great in the sense that it forced us to actually go and find out and make sure that we saw proof. But it was a little bit frustrating that we kind of got marked down for not having renewable energy, even though we knew that we did.
Okay. That's interesting. I wonder why they wouldn't give you that, because I suppose they could, you know, if there were some things they could probably like redact or something. But yeah.
To be honest, I think it was more just that we were not a priority for the building managers. It was like, yeah, okay, we're doing you a favor by digging out this paperwork and showing it to you, but like, don't push your luck. Like, you've had your 10 minutes of generosity.
And so, since you became certified as a B Corp, 2 years ago?
Yeah, so just under 3 years. So we're recertifying early next year.
Yeah, I was gonna. So, what's the ongoing commitment, right? Because you do this one-off impact sort of assessment, right? And then you discover you need to make some changes, and then what? Are you a B Corp forever? What do you need to do on an ongoing basis, and so on?
Yeah, so you basically have to recertify. It was every 2 years, but they've changed it to every 3 years now. And you have to when you recertify, you have to prove that all those things you said that you were doing first time round, that you have been doing for the last 3 years, and they're also looking to see that you've achieved some level of improvement over that time period. I don't know, to be honest. This is something I need to figure out over the next couple of months, to what extent that's a requirement, that there's actually a tangible improvement rather than just sustaining where you were. I think it's sort of the minimum is you've got to sustain where you were, but ideally they want you to have moved forwards.
Okay, then that makes sense. Just as an aside, not strictly sort of environmental related, but the climate environmental side of things is not the only thing that B Corps sort of focus on, right? So there's a bunch of other stuff. Did you see any kind of interesting takeaways from the whole process that are not climate related? Yeah,
so again, just on the sort of getting organized with things. So that one of the sections is workers, and I think we're sort of generally fairly good with our team in terms of sort of flexible work conditions and holidays and sick pay and maternity pay and all those sorts of things. I'm not going to say we're like at the top of the list, but we're above the kind of the standard, and so those were things where we could go through and see like, okay, we're doing these things, but actually a lot of it was never written down. It was just sort of like, yeah, you know, you've got sort of, you're stressed out, just take some time off, don't worry about it. Whereas actually like a lot of that stuff we needed to formalize and write it down. So now we have proper team handbook, which actually has everything documented and written down, and there's no ambiguity, and then it's fair on everybody.
How big is your team nowadays? How big is the company?
So at the moment there's 14 people at WholeGrain.
Okay, that's a good size. I'm not that I'm in a position to judge what is a good or isn't size, but it's not, you know, it's not a couple of people. I guess, you know, there's enough people there that it makes sense, I suppose, to have some formalization.
Absolutely, yeah, and I think that's one of the things about the B Corp assessment that's worth mentioning is that it is like a one, although it's really good and it's very robust, it is one size fits all. So you've got like big companies like the Body Shop using the exact same assessment as WholeGrain Digital, and the scale of our businesses and the nature of our businesses is completely different. So although there's a lot of stuff where it was good for us to start formalizing things because we were at that sort of size where it makes sense, there's equally things where it just it's just not applicable to us. You know, there's questions about like whether you've got like holding companies and child companies and like, you know, all these sorts of things. And it's like, well, no, it's not that complicated.
Yeah. Got it. Okay. Let me switch topics for a little bit. So your agency, your work is, correct me if I'm wrong, I think you said it's WordPress focused, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So now I happen to know the WordPress community quite well, because I've sort of been involved in various ways. And it's quite a fantastic community in a lot of ways, partly primarily I think because of the open source nature of the product, right? And one thing that I've not seen, at least, is much of a conversation around sustainability when it comes to the various topics you get in WordCamps, in the sort of Slack groups and things like that. Yeah. But I'm not on the ground with actually talking to people much anymore. So I wanted to get sort of maybe your thoughts on what is the state of this conversation in the WordPress community, if there even is one.
Yeah, I think it's sort of emerging. So you're absolutely right. It's not really a core topic. You know, if you go to a WordCamp almost anywhere in the world, you'll have topics like accessibility as like very prominent on the agenda, and it's sort of very much part of the wider community discussion. Sustainability, until quite recently, you'd probably have nothing. But that is, I think over the last sort of 2 years, that started changing, and you'll get the occasional sustainability related talk creeping onto the agenda. And also there's more focus on even things like the WordCamps themselves. So some of the WordCamps, including WordCamp London last year, had a sustainability team and were really focused on figuring out how the event itself can be more environmentally friendly. And I think it's that awareness is quite new in the community, but I think it's growing quite quickly.
Okay, which is sort of related to, again, I don't really know much about, you know, the London scene nowadays, but you know, just from your personal point of view, this is purely, you know, to some degree speculative perhaps, but why do you think this whole topic hasn't been so important as yet? Not just in WordPress, but also in WordPress, because like the open source communities tend to be very in touch with sort of changing societal trends and so on. For example, the accessibility is one thing, right? It's a huge thing in WordPress and other OSS communities, and even like you know, diversity and inclusion, and
absolutely,
you know, and income inequality and things like it is. And yet, you know, do you have a theory as to why these progressive communities haven't really done anything much or spoken much about sort of environmental issues?
Yeah, I think, I mean, my main theory is that it's lack of awareness. So I think there's a lot of people in the tech community and particularly in the WordPress community who on a personal level are very environmentally conscious. But I think there's a big sort of knowledge gap as to how that relates to our industry. And I think in most cases, people don't realize that there's really any environmental impact because we're not making physical products that you can see are being manufactured, and then you can see them using energy, and then you can see them being thrown away. It's all, we're kind of living in this happy delusion that that we're sort of creating these harmless things that have no external impact beyond the utility of them. And so I think that's the main reason. I think people just don't realize, and I think now that people are slowly starting to realize that it's starting to become more of a conversation, because people are actually, once they know about it, then they want to do something about it. But also I don't know why it's taken so long for that to emerge, particularly when not just in like building websites is quite abstract, but things like events, for example, like that is tangible, and it's still taken until quite recently for a lot of these big tech events to start really thinking about the environmental impact. So I don't know what it is. I don't know why, to be honest. There just seems to be this abstraction that you care about the environment in your personal life, but then at work, like what we do has nothing to do with the environment, and then the two don't overlap.
Yeah, I've struggled with coming up with a good answer there, because certainly some people, some companies just don't care, right? It's the leadership doesn't care, and so then the staff might feel. I know I've spoken to people who would actually be scared of bringing something like this up, even anonymously within a company, because they might be worried their job might be at risk, right?
Yeah, I mean, one thing probably worth mentioning is that, I mean, obviously my perspective is somewhat UK centric, but a lot of the hosting companies are based in the US, and until recently, I found it really difficult to sort of actually get anybody to have an open conversation about sustainability in those American companies. And one of them, I'm not going to name them because I don't want to embarrass them, but one of them actually told me openly that we really care about climate change, but we can't talk about it because we're in America and there's too many people who are climate change deniers, and it's too controversial because our customer base includes everybody. It includes the people who care about the environment and the people who think that this is all a conspiracy, and and they just don't want. It's just too toxic for them as a topic that they don't want to touch it.
Right. That's very sad, though. That's sort of even saying that you are trying to be more sustainable in your work would put people off doing business with you.
Absolutely.
Because I can understand, if somebody just doesn't believe it, right? That's fine. Maybe it's not going to make them be your customer on that basis, but why they should actively not buy from you? Because it's at the end of the day, just like a precautionary principle, there's nothing wrong with being less bad with your emissions, right? Or things like
absolutely. And it's interesting how there are like US-based companies that do talk about these things. I mean, Google is a good example of where they're quite open about their sustainability plans, and I'm sure there are some people. I'm sure they got some haters, but I don't think it does them any harm.
I think it's not that open in a sense. But they're so dominant, right? Really and truly, if you did hate Google for one reason or the other, it's very, very hard.
It makes no difference to them. But maybe that's it. Maybe it's just the smaller players are just a bit more nervous.
And Google are questionable as well in really what they are actually doing, because although they claim to be carbon neutral or want to be, they also have been accused of, funding climate denial lobbies and things like that. So
absolutely. And actively selling their AI technology to the oil industry to help them extract more and so
Right.
on. So,
Yeah.
you know,
Unfortunately, it's very hard to pin down what these big companies are doing. I mean, as you've discovered, it's even hard to figure out what a small company is doing sometimes.
yeah.
So let alone. Let me just ask you one last thing before we wrap up, which is really sort of more on a personal level. But how do you feel about the whole topic? In the sense that, obviously you're not a climate science denier, right?
Yeah.
Clearly you've been interested in this topic and actively doing something about it. But on a personal level, you take sort of, how close are you to the Extinction Rebellion end of the spectrum versus the Trump end, so to speak? Are you in panic mode? Are you worried? Are you like, oh, this is going to be fine, but we just,
Yeah, so I have a friend who asked me this question the other day, and he is involved in Extinction Rebellion. I said there's sort of these two mindsets of like, it's a big problem, but we can handle this, and then the sort of the next mindset is like, it's too big, we're screwed. And then like the Pandora's box of like, what does that mean in terms of like, what should I do with my life? And I spend most of my time in the sort of the calm, like, we can get a handle on this. It's a big, it is a really, really big problem, but we just need to plug away at it and be positive and constructive. But every now and then I do swing into the sort of the panic box. But I just think, I try and keep myself out, because I just don't think, even if it might be correct, it's not helpful. And I think we've got the only possible route to a good outcome is if we believe that we can get to a good outcome and we constructively work towards it. And that's where I try and keep myself in that kind of mindset.
So what do you do on a personal level?
Yeah, so I mean, on a personal level, I mean, I'll tell you the good stuff and the bad stuff.
Yeah, go for it.
So
I hate to, I mean, it was literally yesterday having sort of was told off by my wife for, something. She's like, "Oh, you're doing this podcast and then you're driving to, wherever." And it's true.
Yeah.
Like, it's you get. Yeah, everybody is a hypocrite in some respect, if you want to use that word, right? But
absolutely. Yeah.
So go for it.
So on the good side, so I've been vegan for like 5-6 years, something like that. Our house, we've got the whole roof covered in solar panels. We've got Ecotricity as our energy supplier. We've got an electric car. We've got rainwater harvesting, a composting toilet. We try and grow some food, although we're not very good at it.
It's hard. I've tried this year. We got an allotment earlier this year, and it's hard work. I
think my attitude is we're learning by failure.
Well, I've learned a hell of a lot this year.
Yeah. And yeah, on the food side as well, like, we get most of our food from Riverford Organic, which is organic veg box. So and then we also try not to fly in Europe. In fact, we haven't flown in Europe for several years. We either take the train or we drive, or we just stay in the UK.
All right, because you're using an electric car, right? So then the driving becomes a bit more. Well, it's okay.
Eco-friendly then. Yeah. On the not so good side is that every few years we either go to visit Vanessa's parents in India, or we go to visit my brother who lives in Australia, which wipes out all of the good things. And that's the big challenge. I think we've all got things where you just think, well, like, I know what the right thing to do is, but I don't know how to actually integrate that into my life.
Yeah, it's hard. I remember, my wife's an environmentalist, and she studied like policy making, from an anthropological perspective and so on. And I remember a few years ago when we first started going out, she was complaining. Well, not complaining, but complaining in a sense, but like not in a in a bad way about the big companies like Coke, for example. Because even sort of like not from an environmental point of view, they used to have a really bad reputation. They still do in some respects, but about how they treat their workers, how their packaging, more from a waste point of view and consumerist sort of thing. And I remember her being really pissed off about this because she was like, I really like Coke, right? She was like, I want to be able to have a can of Coke, and buy it from somebody who's not an asshole, right? It's not like, it is nice to visit your family. Right? Like it sort of feels like sometimes the choices between just not doing anything or else doing something harmful. And that kind of sucks because a lot of it is because there hasn't been the right action taken, right? So the airlines don't give a shit. The oil companies don't give a shit. The big companies don't give a shit. So then, everything you're doing is contributing to the negative side of the problem rather than.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're stuck in a system that sort of means that we're always going to be complicit in a lot of these things, even if we try not to.
Yes, which. A lot of the people I've spoken to on previous recordings of this, they sort of point to basically your vote is what can really make a difference on a personal level.
Which is a great topic for today because we're recording this before the election.
Yes, which unfortunately has been complicated with Brexit, right? But I'm not going to ask you who you're voting for.
Well, I don't mind saying because.
Unless you're happy divulging that.
Yeah, well, Vanita and I are both quite active in the local Green Party, and so we've been busy the last few weeks helping design campaign materials and that sort of thing. So obviously we'll be voting. Well, we've already submitted our postal votes for our friend who is the Green Party candidate locally. So
okay, so you're done. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, fingers crossed we have a good outcome in the election on a number of levels. I need her. I have no qualms in sort of I'm not any sort of fan of the Tories, especially the current incarnation of their sort of leadership. But yeah, it's Brexit has overshadowed the climate conversation too much. So
absolutely.
So unfortunately, up in Scotland, we're sort of forced to vote, and not for the Green Party, but for the SNP, because that's the best bet of not having the Tory candidates elected, which I find very. I'm hugely torn about it because while I'm not against Scottish independence, I'm not Scottish, but even so, I'm not against it. But in terms of like the ideology and the climate environmental policies, I'm much more aligned with the Green Party and even the Labour Party than the SNP and definitely the Lib Dems and the Tories. But it's even there the system screws you over, right?
Absolutely. I mean, the system is designed to basically support the two main parties and to keep out smaller parties. And I think at the last election, if we'd had proportional representation, the Green Party would have, it's either 11 or 12 MPs, which isn't a huge amount, but it's 11 or 12 times more than they currently have. And then that doesn't take into account the fact that there's a huge number of people who would vote for small parties such as the Greens if they believed their vote counted. So that 11 or 12 MPs that they could have got, if you'd actually said to people, you know what, don't tactical vote because your vote really counts, I think it's quite possible that they would have 20 or 30 MPs.
Yeah, for sure. And I have a friend of mine who's a Green Party candidate, and yeah, we've had this conversation a few times. So, yeah, well, fingers crossed. Thank you so much for the whole conversation. Hello, me again. Thank you for listening to the episode. I hope that was as interesting and useful for you as it was for me. As always, I encourage you to visit our website, fatalair.blog, to subscribe to our mailing list and find other ways to contribute and help us support the project. Thank you very much. I'll see you next time.